Hi and welcome to another exciting Blender VFX tutorial. In this episode we're going to be looking at the exploding crows. Well, crows aren't exploding, but actors exploding into a flock of crows, and it's all very much fun. And it's an effect you can use for any kind of dissolve effect. You could use bats or frogs or rats or just particles or even small people. That could be quite fun. Weird, but quite fun. Okay, it's going to be a long one, so I'm going to try and keep it succinct as best I can. You know me for rambling on about nonsense and nothing. So, okay, we're going to use the same clip that we did in the invisibility tutorial. So if you've got that downloaded, open up the Roto Mask Only blend, or if you don't have it downloaded, pop to our website at cgjam.net and download the asset packs from the tutorial page, and we'll get started. So I've already got it open, and we just need to go from the motion tracking, because we don't really need that just yet, to the default window. And the first thing we need to do is to create our camera setup, and to do that just hit the End key. I'll turn on my screencast display. It's over there in the corner, so I'll move it across a little bit, make the text bigger, make the thing bigger, and move it across so that we can see it. There we go. So now when I press buttons on my keypad, it'll show up on there. Let's put my cursor back in the middle. Shift S. Cursor to center. There we go. Okay, so we need to bring our clip into the camera view. So if we click on background images and open up the panel and click add image, go to open image, and we want image sequence 1 from the asset pack, and that's the one with our character on. Image sequence 2 is simply a clear blank background. Well, not blank, it's a clean plate as it's called, which is just our wall and street. Once we've got our background image in, we just want to switch the axis to camera view. We want to change the source from single image to image sequence. We want to change the start frame to 1. No, that's not the start frame. Let's open this window a bit. The number of frames is 379, and the start frame 1. We'll click auto refresh, and that's it. That's good. Now we need to bring our 3D cube into alignment with our movie world. So if we just scroll up in our end panel and under view, we click lock camera to view, and now this red border means that wherever we move in the 3D world, I'm just holding down my middle mouse button and zooming around the cube. You can see we remain fixed in the camera view. If we don't have that done and we zoom around, you'll see it all gets messy. So we'll keep that clicked, and now if we look at the grid lines on our 3D world, we can line those up to the straight edges in the clip. So if I just scroll around, I'm aiming to get this box to be about as real size as possible, and remembering we are each grid space is 1 Blender unit, which equals 1 meter, and a cube in this world is 2 Blender units wide by 2 high by 2 deep, so that's a 2 meter cube. So keeping it to real world sizes, that looks about good. If okay, that looks good. If I press GZ and 1 with the cube selected, that brings the cube onto the floor, so now we can get a better idea of what's real. It's far too big there, so I'm going to scroll out a little bit with the mouse, and if I use this as a slight reference, I can zoom in by holding shift, and oh, that goes up and down. I thought that incremental. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that with a if you hold down Control and roll the middle mouse button, it goes left and right. If you hold down Shift with the middle mouse button, it just goes up and down. You learned something. What happens if you hold Alt? That moves the timeline. Okay. Cool. That's confused me, no end. I thought that would move me in little increments. Obviously not. Never mind. Let's go to wireframe view, press Z. Zoom in a little bit. Now that, I think, is about 1/2 meter, and looking at our grid line, that looks about 1/2 meter. Our cube is ahead of our guy, so if I press G and constrain it to the Y axis, and if I move it in onto our guy, we can see that looks fairly accurate. Now if I grab the camera and I press GZ and I just move the camera up slightly, you can see the grid lines are starting to line up with the floor, and I just want to rotate slightly around the 3D cursor just to bring that edge up. So if I click on my pivot point menu and choose 3D cursor, now when I press R and Y, I can just slightly adjust the floor, and that looks about right. I'll just move the cube, GY, move the cube there. Okay, that looks good. Our guy fits in the cube nicely. Now we need to set up for our scene. The cube is kind of superfluous now, so we'll actually move it to a new layer because we might use it later. So press M and stick it on layer 5, which is at the end of the layer tabs, and you can see it down here now. We just click back to Okay, so in this next section we need to set up our 3D world, and to have our flock of crows in, we're going to need a plane to emit them, because we're going to use a particle system to create the volume of crows, and we're going to need a shadow catcher so the crows cast shadows within the scene. So to do that, we first need a ground plane. So if I press Shift A, add mesh plane, and that puts a plane on the floor. I press Tab into edit mode and press S to start scaling it up. And yeah, that's big enough. Now if I press Control Tab and choose Edge Select from the selection menu, grab that back edge and press GY, and I'll drag it right to the edge, and you can see we are just slightly off, so we're going to tab back into object mode, grab our camera and press Z, rotating still around the 3D camera. Oops, can line it up a little bit better. That looks better. Okay, so now Tab, GY, let's move that slightly back. Now we'll create the curb. Oops, no. EZ, create that curb. EY to the back wall. EZ again, and we'll just go up so that we're off the screen slightly, and we can see that we need to make this a bit wider. So if I press Alt and Alt there, and now if I press SX and pull it up, you can see we are gone. Now, so I still have lock camera to view checked. I'll uncheck that. There, now we have our scene set up, and if I move my camera, if I move my 3D world around, it's not going to move the camera. Okay. Press Z, and that's how our scene looks. There's our road, our curb, and our back wall. Okay, let's go back to camera view. Press Z to make it invisible. Now what we need is an emitter for our particle system. So if you can simply come to these tabs on the side and click plane, and that works just as well as Shift A. GY, move it just under our guy. Now we need to find a good position for our guy to start turning into crows. So if we come down to our timeline and we come to the start, scrubbing through, we see our guy's on his phone, pressing buttons, closes his phone, tips his cap, and then starts to walk off. Now we want the effect to have finished before he starts walking off, because it'll look a bit dumb if he's floating away, half of his body with no legs. So at the point where he tips his cap like that, we want the effect to be finished. So if we press E on our timeline for the moment, and a good start point would be tap 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 on his phone, goes to close the phone. So if we start at 180, press S. Actually we need all the clips, so 379. So we'll put that back. Let's go back, jump back to the start of the clip. Now at this point in the clip, closing his phone, frame 200, and touches his cap. 2, 3, 4, 5, and is just about ready to set off moving. So we want our effect to have finished by then. So if we let's just go back, change our pivot point back to individual origins. If we drag our plane let's scale it down a little bit, move it into a better position, about there. That covers our guy totally. Okay, so if we move it up, GZ, and move it to the top of him there. Now if we insert a keyframe by pressing the I on our keypad, what is all that? Oh, we're still in edit mode. Right, never mind. Object mode is what we are looking for. I've added the plane in object mode, in edit mode, so it's part of this plane mesh. So let's go back to edit mode, go into our camera view, and with just the plane selected, press P, and we get our separate menu, and we want separate by selection, and that makes this plane a separate object to our ground plane. So now if we go to object mode and select our plane, that's ideal. Now if we press Z, we go back to wireframe view. Perfect, perfect. Now press I for our location keyframe, and I want the origin point to be in the middle of the plane, otherwise it'll mess things up. So I'll press Shift S. We've got tools. Set origin to geometry, and that jumps straight up there. Okay, cool. So now eye location. Now if we scrub back to the start of our clip, opens his phone, about there, press GZ, bring it down to the floor level again. Press 3, make sure, just line it up with the floor again. That's it. Okay. Back to camera view. Now if we press, we automatically have put in a keyframe because we've forgotten to turn off our automatic keyframe insertion. So that's good. We'll turn it off now. And if we press Alt A, you can see the plane rises up and our guy sets off, which is fine, but we don't really care about our guy setting off at us because he's going to have disappeared by this point. Alright, so that's all done. In this next chapter, what we're going to do is we're going to apply a particle system to our plane, and we're going to use that particle system to drive the crows into flying around. And for this effect we're going to use Boyd's particles. If we go to our data display tab and select the particle system, select new particles, and if we double click that and rename it as crows. Doesn't matter about naming it really in this instance because we're only using one particle system, but it's good to get into the habit of renaming things. Okay, so emission 1000 is far too many, so we're going to drop that down to 100. In the preview I used only, how many did I use? I used 80, but I think 100 will give us a nicer flock. So we need our start frame to start at the start of the effect, and I think if we let it rise up a couple of frames, so if we start it at 188, start frame 188, and end at 225. Lifetime, we want it to last the entire length of the clip, so 180 to 380, so that's about 200 frames. So we'll call it 200 frames, and that'll just ensure that our crows exist and cast their shadows on the plane right up to the very end of the clip. Okay, emit from faces is fine. Random, even distribution, we don't have modifiers, so we don't need that. Velocity, that's all going to change any moment now, because if we scroll down to physics and click Boyd's, you'll see all our options have changed to just the Boyd's system. And the first thing we're going to look at is the Boyd brain, and this gives the behaviour for our particles. So if I just press Alt A and let it scrub through, you see nothing happens. Okay, so that was a little bit weird. I ended up deleting the particle system and adding it back in again, and we're back to where we started. So now if I press play, you'll see our particles are emitting from the plane and just kind of milling around in the viewport. If we go back to our camera view and press Z, you can see this is not going to be great. So we need to go to our Boyd brain, and you see the behaviour is set to separate, which they start off separated, and then flock, and they are kind of coming together in a little flock, and that's all they're doing. So what we need to do is tell them that they really want to go flying off in all different directions. So if we go to flock and delete that, and then we go to the plus and add a new behaviour, and I find that for this particular scene, avoid is a good behaviour for them to do, and as you can see, they're not avoiding anything, they're not doing anything at all, they're just sitting there, not even milling around anymore, because we need to have an object for the voids to actually avoid. And in the trailer I used the floor plane, which worked, but it did mean that all the particles came flying towards the camera, and while that was effective and quite cool, I'd like them to go flying off in all directions, all over the place this time. So if I just pause that for the moment and go to create, and we add an empty, which has appeared way up there, so that's no good. Shift S, cursor to selected, and Shift S, selection to cursor. Now our empty is in the same position as our plane. It's right in the middle of our particles. So if we scale it down, doesn't need to be huge, that's big enough. And now if we go back to our void brain by clicking our plane there, and under object we'll choose the empty, and now if we play back, the particles are fleeing away from the empty, except that one, which is just kind of milling around. I think it's probably behind the wall in real life. Okay, so that's as cool as it gets, but we don't want them to go through the floor or go flying through the wall, so if we stop that, right click on the floor plane, and under this little bouncing ball tab we choose the collision physics, leave them at default. All we want the particles to do is just not go on there. So now if we go back to our physics and go back to the start, we should see particles are kind of skimming across the ground and bouncing into the curb and just being generally retarded, which is fine, we can cope with that. That's quite fun, having our crows crashing into the floor. Now, all our behaviours are fine. If we look at our physics now, we can see the max airspeed is 10, and that's probably okay, but we're going to bring it up a little bit. Let's try 20. See them scattering around. I think this is going to be well, it'll be interesting anyway. Okay, so now what we need to do is bring in our crow and turn our particles into actual little tiny crows. So let's do that now. If we click on layer 2, now we need to append our crow, and we've included one on the website if you just need to download it quickly. And then we go to our file menu and click append, and we need to find where's our crow. Now we just choose the crow.blend, and we want the object, and if we select the armature and then shift select the cube, because I forgot to rename the crow and it's called cube, so deal with it. And there it is, a beautiful ready rigged crow. Yeah, let's have a look at this guy. Okay, he's not brilliant, he's not the best crow in the world, but he's good for the tutorial. But first we're going to need to actually have to animate this guy, and to do that we're going to create an action. So let's crack open our timeline window and stretch it up a bit, and we'll change one timeline to a dope sheet, and under the dope sheet where it says dope sheet we're going to choose action editor, and we've already got some keyframes on this guy. Okay, maybe not. Let's bring it back to frame 1, set the start frame, reduce that down a bit, and we want to choose new action, and we'll name this crow underscore flap, because that's really all we're going to be doing, is flapping its wings. Press enter, and if we go into side view to start with, now crows generally fly vertical, and so we need to rotate it slightly. So if I hold that button there, press R, and we'll just put it so it's kind of level. That's good. And now we'll tuck his legs up, rotate those so they go up into his belly a little bit. That's it, just match that side. Rotate his little crow legs. Now I did originally have a bone in his back toes, but I don't know where they've gone. Somehow we've lost a bone, but not to worry. Let's see now. Grab all these, G, Shift G to select multiple objects. We'll go back into side view and put the 3D cursor down there, rotate around 3D cursor, oops, not grab, rotate, okay, that's not looking too shabby. Let's just fix his head a little bit because he's looking a bit down. Move the 3D cursor to the base of the bone and press R. Head down a little bit. We want his beak forward. So put the 3D cursor at the corner of his mouth. Select the top bone, shift select the bottom bone and press R. Make his beak go a little bit forward. It's messed up his eyes a little bit, but that's okay. We'll just 3, move that down there. G to move both the bones together, and we'll just lift that up slightly. Okay, there we go. Now switch to individual origins and choose the top bone, press R, slightly, not much, and then the bottom bone, press R, and just open his mouth a little bit because crows fly with their mouths open. If you didn't know that, well, you do now. Okay, I lied. Don't listen to anything I have to say about crows because I have a tendency to talk bollocks. Okay. Now, before we start flapping his wings, let's move him into his base position, we'll select one, select his left side, and rotate his wings down into a reasonable looking flat position. Yeah, don't press F because F doesn't mean flap. You want to press R to rotate the bones, not F to flap the wings. There we go, and we just match the other side. Okay. I'm just rotating from the point of view of the viewport, which is fine. Okay, let's just see. Yeah, it looks okay. I'm actually going to rotate that slightly along the rotating slightly along the x-axis, just enough to give the wings a bit of a tilt. Okay, press A once you've done that, press 1 to go into front view. Now with all the bones selected, we'll hit I and we'll insert the rotation keyframe. So now we want our animation to run at 3 flap cycles per second, which will be pretty quick. It'll be like flap, flap, flap each second. And it's 30 frames a second, so we simply need to animate the wings to go up by 5 frames, and then in the next 5 frames come back down again. So if we go to our timeline, I'm just scrolling a little bit. There we go. If we go to frame 5, now if we select our wing and press R to rotate, and we'll take it up, do the same on the opposite side, take it up, kind of match them, there we go, that's one side done. Back there, and last bone. Okay. Select all the wing bones by pressing Shift and right clicking each bone. Now they're in position, and press I and insert rotation keyframes. Now if we go back to frame 0, we should be on frame 1 for that. That's messed it up again. Just grab everything on frame 0 and move it along to frame 1. I hope that's frame 1. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Frame 0, frame 5, frame 1 rather, now that we're back in the right place. Now if we come over to our tools, just move that down again, where it says pose, if we click copy, now if we click to frame 10 and click paste, you'll see our arms are back down at the bottom. If we just end there, start at frame 1, press Alt A. You can see we fail miserably. Okay, it's because we didn't put in the keyframe, so let's go back to frame 10, click paste. Now press I to insert the rotation keyframes, and now we should have a flappy cycle. Flap, 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 flap. Good. Okay, that works. And we can add additional keyframes in the middle to smooth out the transitional smoothness of it, but we're not going to in this. We don't really need to. The curves are going to be tiny enough as it is. Minor details aren't going to be seen, especially with the motion blur. We just want it to appear flapping. Okay, so now that we have our animation done, we want to switch our window from a dope sheet to the NLA editor, and on this crow flap we just want to click the snowflake, and if we zoom out, we want our crow flap to start at frame 180, finish at the end of the cycle with the film clip. So if I press G and move that across to frame 60, 70, 80, 185, that'll do, because our crows don't actually start appearing until frame 185. So now we'll just change our end frame back to 379. We want our crow to continue its flapping cycle all the way up to the end of the clip. So let's open up our end data panel, and if we scroll down, we'll see the action, where it says action clip. We want it to repeat enough times to get to the end of the cycle. So if we just drag that across, oops, 350, and we'll just match it to 380 because that's close enough. Keep going, tweak, 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 380, there we go. And now if we go to frame 380, press Alt A, let it cycle through, we should start seeing it flapping as it goes through the NLA editor, and it will continue flapping up to the end of the clip. That's perfect, that's exactly what we need it to do. So we can stop that, and now we can go back to layer 1 where we have all our particles. Find our particle emitter. Is that hiding? There. Okay, got it. Now we need to change these particles into little crows. So let's open up our physics pad, and where it says, scroll down where it says render, we don't want to render the emitter, so we uncheck that, and we come down here to object, and we'll choose cube 0, 1. There we go, we have thousands of crows everywhere looking rather distraught. Okay, so let's start our clip back at frame 180. just press S in the timeline, not the correct frame. Press Alt A, and we'll see our crows scattering about and flying backwards, and in some cases upside down. Now they do actually turn the right way up. Slightly confused crows there, but that's okay. So what we need is to turn our crows around and prevent them from sinking through the floor. So to turn the crows around, okay, we need to switch to active element and then press RZ90, and that turns it round correctly. Alright, now we've fixed that little issue, let's go to our layer again. And just to get the birds to face the right way, we make sure that in our particle render settings we have rotation checked, and we turn our bird around 90 degrees on the Z. R Z 90, and now it should be facing the correct way. Go back to our camera view, go back to the start, Alt A, there they go, facing the right way, they're all flapping off in different directions, some over there, some over there, some towards the camera, some towards the back of the screen. That's perfect. Okay, so now we have all our birds set up and we're all flapping and flying around nicely. We can move into the compositing and setting up our render layers and everything. So that's the first thing we'll do. We'll go into our scene panel, and we need two render layers. We would need one for the background and one for the crows. So let's select our crows and our empty object by shift clicking, and we'll I was going to move them onto this bottom layer, but I seem to have already done that. That's okay. Okay, right. So on our bottom layer we have our shadow catcher, and on our top layer we have our crows and our empty, and we'll need to have our lamp on the bottom row as well, and we do. Okay, so let's set up our scene. On the first layer, let's double click the render layers, and we'll change that to crows. And if we press the plus button, create a new render layer, select the shadow catcher, choose, make sure that layer is selected, and change it to shadows. Now our birds, we need to mask the shadow layer, and if we select our crows, we need to, under mask layer, check the shadows layer. Otherwise, when you render it, all you'll see is the shadow catcher, and the birds will just render as a black screen, which isn't very good. Now we need to activate our passes. So on our shadows layer, we need to enable the shadows and the AO, and on our crows we need to make sure the vector is checked. That's all good, because we'll need the vector for our speed pass. And under our render settings, let's tick the sampled motion blur. They're only little, so we'll leave it at 1, otherwise they'll be too blurred and you won't be able to make them out. And shading, we need to change the alpha from sky to transparent, otherwise you'll simply render this grey background along with your crows, and you won't be able to see through to the shadows layer. Okay, that's all good, that's all good. Let's go into our compositing. Go to our compositing window space. Reduce that down now. And we have one render layer called crows already. So if we press Shift D, duplicate that, change it from crows to shadows. That's those two set up. Now we need to create our shadow pass, and we'll do that in exactly the same way that Blender would do it if you were to add it in using the motion tracking tools. But because we don't have any motion tracking data on this, it doesn't automatically set up the scene, so we have to do it manually. And it's a good idea to know how to do that, so let's get on with it. So the first thing we need to do is set up our shadow catcher, and we'll do that by pressing Shift A, add colour, mix. We'll change that mix to an add, and then we'll press Shift D, duplicate the add node, and let's make this full screen for a moment while we're working on these so you can see what's going on. That's just Control and up arrow. Now we need to duplicate this add node again, Shift D, and change it from an add to a multiply. Before we connect them together, we need to have an invert node, so Shift A, add colour, invert, and now we can start connecting them together. So we want the alpha to be inverted, and we connect the invert node to the top of the add node, and then we take that add node and connect it to the top of the multiply node. Now we take our shadow layer and connect it to the same add node, and that's that little node section done. Now we once again take our invert, connect it to the top of the second add node, and we take our AO layer, our ambient occlusion, and drop that into the image, and now we can connect both those add nodes to the multiply node, and it's all ready for connecting to our image sequence. So that's good. Let's set up our crows layer, and to do that we just need to add Shift A. We are looking for a vector blur node, filter, vector blur, and we'll drop that straight on the noodle, and that connects the images together. And I want the Z pass to connect to the Z, and the speed pass to connect to the speed, and that's that little one set up, and we'll connect them all together in a moment. But first we need to bring in our image sequences. So Shift A, add input, image, drop that down, Shift D, and the first one we will open up image sequence 1. Select the first one and open image. Let's move that one to the side for a moment. It's set on image sequence. The frames we know are 3, 7, 9. Enter. Start frame 1. Click on auto refresh. That's that one done nicely. And for our background we'll just click on open image sequence 2. Click the first one, open image, single image to image sequence. Frames, we'll use 100 frames. Change to cyclic so it doesn't stop halfway through the film. and we'll click auto refresh. And the reason we use an image sequence and not just a single image is because of the natural film noise that you get in the clip. If it was a single image, it would just be static, whereas our original image, it's all flickery and moving, so we keep that flickery moving kind of thing happening when we change to our background image. It's just a bit of it keeps it neat anyway. Okay, so we need to put these two together, so we'll select one of these mix nodes, Shift D, bring that up there, change it to a mix node, bring our character image and put that in the bottom, and our background image and put that on top. Now we need to mix this together with our background shadow catcher, so let's duplicate this multiply node, Shift D. Let's move our crows layer out of the way for a minute, drag them down to the bottom. On our shadows layer, we'll drag the multiply noodle to the bottom setting, and our image sequences to the top setting, and we'll take a look at that by pressing Ctrl Shift and clicking, and that brings us a viewer node into the scene, nicely connected to that node. That's fine. I'm going to select that and box select by holding down the right mouse button, select all those, and just bring them out of the way, and bring our crows back up because we're going to connect these all now. Now with our crows, we have our vector blur, and we need to connect it to this multiply node. So if I press Shift A, add color, alpha over, and I drop that on top of the multiply node, see it all goes white, and then if I drop my crows on top, nothing happens. I haven't actually rendered the scenes, so that's why they're not showing up. So if I go to my render panel and hit render, and you can see it's just preparing itself, so I'll pause the video while this renders. It could take a while. Okay, not too bad, 45 seconds. Let's go back to our full screen in our node editor. Now I swap those around, so let's put them back in the right positions. Hopefully they're in the right positions. Yeah, there we go, lots of crows all flying about. That's fantastic. I'm going to press Shift A and add RGB curves, and I'm just going to drop that, or not. I'm going to connect that to the colour. Let's separate that noodle, we don't need that. And I'm just going to pull back a little bit of the darkness, unless I'm not. Am I making them darker? Yeah, let's brighten them up a little bit. That's not working. Let's I'm just going to add in Shift A, a brightness and contrast node. Let's drag that up a little bit and drag that down a little bit. Let's see how that affects it. Yeah, now we're starting to bring the colour in a bit. Just having to wait for it to do its compositing tricks. Bring down the contrast a little. Okay, that didn't make much difference, but it's just enough to make it acceptable. Okay. So that's all good, but we need to make our guy disappear now, and to do that we will use a texture to transition between the image sequences. So if I press Ctrl up arrow and I go to my textures tab, if I click new and I want to change the type to a blend type, and the blend I want it to be vertical, and we're going to activate the color ramp, and let's bring that handle in a bit, and we'll bring the white handle down a bit, and we'll make that transition a little bit sharper. We don't want it too sharp, but we don't want it too blurred either, so that looks about good. And we'll rename the texture to transition. And now for our mix node, we're going to drive it using that texture. So let's add in Shift A, add input texture, and we will choose our transition texture, connect color to the factor. Let's go full screen again, Control up arrow. Now it looks like his feet are slightly fading out, and we can change these values by adding in a value node. Control A, add input value, and we'll drop that value into the offset, and now this single value will drive all three of those values that we had, and 0.5 is right down at the bottom of the screen, so it's transitioning around here somewhere. So let's bring that up. Let's try 0, see where that starts us. Okay, that's starting us halfway up the page, and if we need to find our start frame for our clip. So again, Control up arrow, and in our timeline we'll just bring it back to the start. And on our value node, we will keyframe the position there by pressing I over the value. If we keep an eye on our camera perspective window as well as our node window, if we go halfway through, the plane has gone up halfway, so if we click through, 1, 2, just let that sort itself out. No, that's pulling it down. So we want to go into the negative numbers, so -7, see where that brings it. That's too high. -5, that should be about right. Yeah, we'll insert the keyframe in there. That just keeps it in the middle. And from there to the end, now we go down to -1. -1, enter, see where that leaves us. Not quite there, so -1.1, -1.2 should be good enough. So if we press I again at the end, that's our texturing done. But it's a bit smooth, and a little thing I quite liked when I was looking at the texturing is to have the character actually seeming to break apart with the crows. I'm not sure if it's going to work with this because all the crows are going up in front of the character on an upwards spiral, but we'll give it a try. And what I'm going to do is use the alpha from our crows layer and use that to add to the mask. What we need is a multiply node. So where's our multiply nodes? if I press Shift D, duplicate that, and we want our texture to go into here. Put that in the bottom. We take our alpha from the crows layer and put it in the top, and connect that to the factor. Now if we take a look at our multiply node to the viewer, you'll see that's not really done anything. So what we need to do is duplicate that invert node. I thought we were on full screen. Control up arrow, full screen. Okay, this is getting a little bit messy, so let's tidy it up a little bit. So if we drop this between the render layer and the multiply node, there we go, that's what we're after. Now if we look at it through our now you see the crows are cutting out our guy before we want them to. So we're going to add a translate node, so Shift A, distort, translate, and we'll drop that just after the invert node. And if we quickly render this frame, F12. Okay, now we've rendered back on the correct frame. If I take this translate node and move it up just a couple of pixels or fractions of pixels on the y-axis, that should move it up slightly. And now if we look at our crows by pressing our alpha over, Shift Control A, you can see there's just a tiny little fraction of a pixel. Let's move it up to 0.7. We'll just, that will give us just a slight breaking apart. Move it up to 1. Yeah, that's quite good. I'm just moving the layer up slightly, and that's everything we need to do. That's all our render layers, all our nodes. We just need to connect the final output to our composite node. Don't forget that. Click that in, and now we can render out our image sequence. So I will do that. Control up arrow to come back to our main window, render settings, and it's set to our temp file. And remember, we don't need to render the whole sequence from frame 1 because nothing's happening on frame 1. We can just use the image sequence images in the video sequence editor. We only need to render out what's going on with the 3D view. So if I click on the first frame of our sequence, I press S on the timeline to start there. Now our frame range is from 181 to frame 379. We're at 30 frames per second because that's the frame rate of the clip. 1280 by 720 because that's the resolution of the clip, because my camera's crap. And with that done, we can hit the animation button. Okay, so there's a couple of problems with it. First, the blend texture is a little bit too strong, so it's dissolving faster than I like. And the other issue is that the crows are not flapping their wings. So we'll have to jump in quickly and fix those two issues, and then we'll render out the final animation and see how we go from there. Okay, so the first problem is the flapping birds, and that's an easy fix. In order for the particle animation to relate to the actual model animation, we need to come down here and just shift click to activate the layer that holds our bird. And now if we play through with Alt A, let them rise up. Let's make this full screen. You can see our birds are now flapping, which is exactly what we need. Alright, so that's that bit solved, and we don't need to worry about the big bird showing up in our scene or causing us rendering issues, because the layer that the bird is on isn't included in our active render layers. It's just the animation data that is being referenced. Okay, so now the next problem that we had was the texturing. So if we come back to our texture, and if we just tighten that up a little bit, I think if we move the white down, just give that a look. Well, that's much sharper. So if we just render that frame quickly, see where our birds are. Okay, now we can see a bit closer, and we can see we're slightly blurred out as we disappear, and there's a bit of a gap where the crows appear, which is we'll just make that a little bit more by scrolling into our translate node, and we'll increase the Y value to 2. Let that composite quickly, just doing its thing, and that's fine. That increases that gap so it looks like we're breaking up a little bit faster, and I think we're done. One other thing I just want to change is the lamp. So if I go to my object settings, select the lamp, and if we change it to a sun lamp and make sure the lamp is pointing into the scene, because if it's pointing in the opposite direction you'll catch the shadows of the actual shadow caster and it'll all look black and horrible. So we keep the sun pointing into the scene like so, and that'll give us a better view of what's going on. Our crows look fine. Let's just give that another final test render, and that's fine. And as you can see, the sun lamp has made the crows look a lot nicer now. The motion blur is not quite as nice, so under our render settings, find the sampled motion blur. Let's just click that up to 2 and see how that looks. No, let's not. Let's put that back down to 1, and we'll re-render it as it was, and it should be fine. So let's now check our scene. Everything's looking good, it's all animated. Now we can finally get into the final render, and now if we hit animate for the final time, make sure our resolution is 100%, and away we go. And I'll join you back with the finished version in just one small moment. And here it is, our final result. All very cool looking. There we go. Fabulous. Alright, so that's great. That's it. That's all you need to know. So have fun working with that, and we'll see you in our next video. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it, and we'll have that out to you pretty soon. Okay, thank you very much.